Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we finally watched To Be or Not to Be from 1942, Ernst Lubitsch's black comedy about the Nazis, particularly the invasion of Poland. You've been on at me about this for a very long time. We finally agreed to watch it. I had a very good time.
It's a masterpiece. It's one of the great films. It's an amazing film for anyone who's interested in comedy, because it's a film that gets comedy out of everything, right? I mean, one of the things that fascinates me about this film is the way that it gets humor out of rhythm, out of the repetition of things. I mean, there are recurring jokes in it that have to do just with the sounds of things. Ronansky, Bonansky, Plonansky, right? Like at the beginning, right? And riffing on all that, like, so the repetition of Schultz, or they call you concentration camp Gerhard, or like kind of, I mean, it's an amazing
The thing about
film.
It'll get a big laugh. The Jewish character always says. Greenberg.
Yes.
It'll get a big laugh, and then it comes back right at the end when it's, if you get caught by the Nazis, it'll get a big laugh.
Yes. Everything repeats in this film, actually. Everything is set up and repeats beautifully, including, the scene from, what's the Shakespeare? The Merchant of Venice. Shylock's speech.
Do I not bleed?
Yeah, which repeats 3 times in 3 completely different contexts and has 3 completely different effects. The last, not for humor, in fact. I mean, it's just an amazing piece of engineering, the film, yeah?
Truthfully, I didn't think that any of those instances were designed for humour. Those 3 instances of the Shylock speech. I mean, I think one of the strengths of the film is that it doesn't play absolutely everything for laughs, and it understands where not to, because like the invasion of Warsaw is not a joke in and of itself, and the film doesn't play it as a joke. It plays the kind of absurdity of the Nazi regime or Nazi behaviour around it as a joke. It plays the absurdity of the way that Jack Benny is constantly looking for praise as a joke.
Yeah.
So it finds these areas for humour, but the kind of central... It reminds me of something that Mel Brooks once said when he was talking about Blazing Saddles, and there's a scene very early on where I forget the black sheriff's name, but it's before he's a sheriff. He's about to be hanged, and he said it only works as a joke if he gets away, which he does. The joke would not be a joke if you saw him hanged. Like, that's kind of there's a line to draw, and this has, I think, a similar attitude. It doesn't overdo anything, or it doesn't look in the wrong places for humour.
No, I mean, though I suppose it's a question of perspective. When it was released, it was thought to be in very bad taste.
Yeah, I saw that, and I can understand that as well. You can imagine how it plays differently many decades down the line, because now it's such a brave kind of thing to do, work to make. But at the time, you can totally understand how people go, "Oh, I don't know, not the time."
Yes, I think, I'm not sure whether America was even in the war at the time it was released, actually. But I think part of the reason why the film was considered, to be in bad taste is because, aside from Chaplin, Hollywood had not really critiqued Hitler at all. Or, so this seemed as a very brave and daring film. And, at a time when... people hadn't quite chosen sides. I mean, people forget, but there were a lot of pro-Mussolini, pro-Hitler groups in New York. Yeah, there was like fascist leagues all over New York. So now we would consider it brave, then it was considered in bad taste. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is before all of the stuff was really known in a general way, right?
About the Holocaust in particular.
Yeah, kind of those things are made fun of. I mean, when Carole Lombard says, "Wouldn't this look great in my concentration camp scene?"
Yeah.
Right? Imagine the Nazis whipping me in this fabulous gown.
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting to me that the one character who is very clearly identifiable as Jewish, although they never actually... I don't think they use the word Jew or Jewish, but Greenberg has a Jewish name, and he's constantly he's associated with the Shylock sequence. He is obviously Jewish.
Well, they kind of tell you, because when the critique that he makes of the ham actor is, "What you are, I wouldn't eat."
Yes, yeah, he does say that. That's right. He is a really sympathetic character, and he's, like I say, he's the one who, in amongst all of the farce and absurdity, he grounds it. I think,
Yes. Well, actually, he and the other spear carrier.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, that scene when they're walking in the snow, and they say, "Oh, imagine carrying a spear now. Yeah, those were the days. I hope they'll come back again." So what they're bitching about at the beginning, that they're only spear carriers and they never get their big break. In the middle of the film, they'd be so happy to be carrying a spear in the theater again.
Yeah. And what you say about the film being kind of clever and intricate, I really agree with, particularly early on, where, having not seen the film, having not really known anything about it, I thought, the developing romance between the pilot and Carole Lombard is going to become the central thrust of a lot of the film. And it really isn't. It fades away. But the way it's used is, it has kind of double meaning. So he starts off with, he's a pilot and he gets to know her, and then it's because he wants to send a message to her when all the Polish fighting in the RAF want to send messages with Selecki back to Warsaw to all their loved ones, and he says, "Well, it's not my loved one, but it's this woman," and he says her name and he doesn't recognise it, and that's where he realises, oh, this guy isn't who he says he is, because everyone knows this woman. So it's it starts off as this romantic subplot, but it develops into the reason he catches him out. And it's a development that you don't anticipate. Well, I didn't. You've seen it 100 times, but I didn't see, oh, that's how it's going to go. I thought that was really clever plotting.
Yes, everything is clever plotting. This is like a Swiss clock. Everything has its place. Everything is set up and gets a payoff, and then gets another payoff, and then gets another payoff. I think it's beautiful. And the style of playing is just like a marvel, right? Like, I mean, the way that Carole Lombard says, "Oh, okay, lovely to see you, bye."
Yeah.
And just changes, she gets laughs out of just line readings, right? I mean, it's kind of miraculous, really.
Oh, that's it. He says something like, "I've never met a woman like you before. I've never met an actress before." And she says, "Lieutenant, this is the first time I've ever met a man who could drop 3 tons of dynamite in 2 minutes before. Bye."
Yes.
Beautiful. What an amazing line reading. I loved it. I thought, oh gosh, he throws it away so magnificently. And what you were saying the other day about the increase in her comedic abilities between 20th century and this is absolutely true. Like, she's so much more in control of her line readings, that sort of thing. She was kind of shrill to some degree in 20th century, but here she's very, very different.
She's wonderful. And Jack Benny, who plays her husband, he makes me laugh just with his body language. The way that he comes out on stage as Hamlet and then settles down to begin to be or not to be. And he does this thing with his little stick insect legs where he puts the leg at the side. Right? I mean,
he's really, really good. I didn't really know him as a film star, but he must have. I mean, clearly he was, because he's got top billing here.
He was mainly a radio and television star. He was one of those comedians that had started in vaudeville as a comedian, and and then he developed this persona and so on. So he was one of the most famous people in America, one of the highest paid people, but it was on radio mainly, right? So
that's how I'm familiar with him, because I am familiar with him to an extent, and I really like his TV stuff, and I think his persona is wonderful. Yes. But to see him playing a character, I guess, I mean, I suppose there must be analogues for it in modern day with kind of, I don't know, like comedians or talk show hosts who you don't associate with being in films, showing up in films and doing a good job, and maybe even having films built around them. But I didn't expect it. But I thought he was wonderful, and the pompousness, again, I suppose in a similar way to 20th century. It's a slightly different character, but his character is not that unlike John Barrymore. In this sense, he's always looking for praise, as opposed to thinking he has kind of big ideas. But he has a similar pompousness.
Oh, he's so great. Yeah. So have you heard of the great Joseph Tura?
Yes.
Like, he always repeats "great" twice.
Yeah. And he's constantly giving himself away by doing that, fucking idiot. I mean, that's the thing that's beautiful, is watching idiots give themselves away. The German officer who's constantly yelling "Schultz," he's a perfect idiot, and I love to watch him.
That's General Erhard. And that's played by Sig Ruman. I think he's my favorite character in the whole film. He's both so funny and so touching and so ridiculous and so servile, right? And he's one of those people who gets laughs out of nothing, right? So when he gets scared, oh, please don't tell Hitler.
Yes, yeah.
And actually, this line where he tries to blame it all on his assistant, Schultz, and every time that word Schultz is uttered, it's a laugh, right? And it's just brilliant architecture of comedy, because so he gets a laugh out of every time he utters Schultz, including at the end where he tries to commit suicide, fails, and then, once you hear the gun go off, then he yells, Schultz!
Yeah.
It's a brilliant payoff. And that bit was so famous that in Billy Wilder's Stalag 17, he actually plays, a German officer. It's a concentration camp comedy, Stalag 17. And he plays a character called Schultz.
All right.
So so it's a bit of business that resonated in the culture to such an extent that you can then name he can then play the whole character based on the name, based on the punchlines that he got here.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Like Flanderization, isn't it? Like Flanders in The Simpsons kind of has, one line of dialogue, says diddly, and then he becomes the breakout character, sort of a little bit like that. I was thinking the other day, apropos of nothing really, about what we've talked about before with satire and whether it makes a difference. Because I said, it's overblown, people kind of think it makes more of a difference than it does. And I was thinking about it, and I thought I'd probably need to reevaluate that to an extent, and in the light of this as well, because it's not that it never makes a difference, but what I object to is when people say, this particular film made such a difference. The Great Dictator is the film that brought down Hitler. That kind of thing is nonsense. But I think in a direct sense, I think it's hard to make those arguments. But in a general sense, it is, because these things feed into the culture. And I think, this is another film that does a similar sort of thing. And again, I was thinking about Mel Brooks, actually, because I was thinking about The Producers, and I thought of that when I brought up this, because the thing about The Producers, interestingly, is, and I think it shares this property with To Be or Not to Be and The Great Dictator, is they are completely unambiguous about what they're saying. You can't possibly, even willfully, take them out of context and reappropriate them, which you can do with other things. So if you look at something like Cabaret, the song Tomorrow Belongs to Me, that's written by two Jews, as a kind of parody of kind of Nazi sort of anthems. But that hasn't stopped white supremacist groups adopting it and using it. If you look at like American History X, similar sort of thing there with, it's supposed to be satirizing or criticizing neo-Nazis, but it makes them look cool, and neo-Nazis really love it. You can't do that with The Producers, and you can't do that with Great Dictator, and you can't do that with To Be or Not to Be. And I think that's one of their real strengths. The complete inambiguity of it. You can't, like a neo-Nazi would never sing Springtime for Hitler. They can't.
But for me, and of course, that Mel Brooks did a remake of To Be or Not to Be.
Yeah, I did.
But to me, their sense of humor is incomparable. I love Mel Brooks, but Mel Brooks is really crude. And Lubitsch is not. And Mel Brooks scapegoats, someone is the butt of humor, and it can get really nasty and corrosive and angry. Lubitsch is none of those things, and I think it's very interesting because Lubitsch was also a Jew, but he was a Berliner. He was born and bred and raised in Germany. I think he wasn't trained as a comedian. What Lubitsch wanted to be always was an actor, and he trained with one of the great theatrical figures of the turn of the 19th, 20th century, Reinhardt. He had a contract as a bit player with Reinhardt, where he did Shakespeare and all of that stuff. So the major, most innovative theater director is where Lubitsch got his training. And Lubitsch is a major figure, right? He was involved in the beginnings of UFA, right? And unlike other people who moved to America after 1933 when Hitler came into power, Lubitsch went to America in the early 1920s. I think it was 1923 or 24, right? Already as one of the great directors in the world, right? So I think his position on all of this is very different, right?
Oh,
So,
yeah, yeah.
you know, you don't see any anger in this film, right? Like, you also don't see any nastiness even towards the Germans, right? Like, I mean, they're made figures of fun, right? To be so servile and self-important, and you know, so he makes the Nazis buffoonish, but also kind of lovable in a way, right? Like, you know, Colonel Earhart is, yeah,
Yeah,
kind of terrible in many ways, and why don't you shoot him?
yeah.
Yeah, but you know, he's also made endearing in another way.
He's a lovable idiot. He can't get anything right, and he's constantly
Yeah,
kind of easily fooled. And those are all endearing qualities, the way they're played here.
and this might be why, you know, I think in the 19, I think this film, I'm not too sure of the history, so people can look it up, but I think this film was only allowed to be shown in Germany like from the 70s onwards or something. And but then it ran in a Berlin theater from the 70s until just a few years ago. Yeah, there's a wonderful documentary by Tom Tykwer on Lubitsch where, you know, they try to get a street named after Lubitsch, right? One of the great directors in the world, and they fail, right? And so, you know, they kind of, yeah, they bring in all of this information as to why he should. And one of the bits of information that I found very intriguing is that this film ran for decades in a Berlin theater, right? So there's something about this film that even for Germans is acceptable, yeah? That so obviously it was a critique, it's a critique of Nazism, yeah, and so on, but it's not so alienating, distancing, yeah, it's not so unknown to them or unrecognizable to them that they would reject it outright. Yeah, that in fact it kept going, you know, on and on, playing daily in the same theater for decades, which is quite extraordinary, I think.
Yeah,
All I'm trying to say is that Lubitsch was a German. I mean, he was a Jew, but he was a German. He was a Berliner. Yeah, I actually think his nationality was Russian or something because, you know, even though he was born in Berlin, yeah, he couldn't be a German or something. So he's always credited as being a Russian Jew or something. But really, he was born and bred in Berlin. Yeah, his parents, both of them had already been born in Germany, right?
his father was born in Grodno in the Russian Empire, and his mother was born just outside Berlin. It says here.
Yeah. So he is, yeah, a Berliner. And he's familiar with the people and he's familiar with the culture and he pokes fun at it, but he pokes fun at it in a knowing way, yeah, in a way that recognizes the types and so on. It's not like this, you know, you could imagine Mel Brooks doing it and being absolutely nasty and corrosive about the Germans, right? As he had every right to be.
Yeah, like he would kind of speak in broad strokes, and he'd use stereotypes and that sort of thing. That's more his style. I think you're right.
Yeah, what I love about Lubitsch is that he's so kind and he's so wise. So there's no one in this film that's rendered hateful, you know, kind of. There's no one, you know, there are people that you're meant to laugh at and there are people you're meant to laugh with, you know, and so on. But actually even the people that you're laughing at, they're not evil or awful, or they all have human foibles. They're all kind of rounded in some way. There's something about them that makes them endearing, yeah, like Captain Earhart. And what I also love about Lubitsch is that everything in the film is an attempt to delight. Yeah? You know, the costumes are there for your pleasure. You know, the jokes are there for your pleasure. He takes care with everyone. So you were saying earlier about, you know, how the Merchant of Venice speech, how none of them is meant to be funny. And I kind of disagree with you. So, I mean, I kind of agree in that they're all played for emotion, but they all have, well, some have punchlines that are visual jokes. So when he first gives the speech in the theater, as he's giving the speech, the ringlets on the side of the hair of the person he's giving the speech to move like a punchline to a joke, right? Like, and it's clearly deliberate, right? Because I mean, it's foregrounded, right? So it's like the wind from the soliloquy is blowing on this piece of hair. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so funny, right?
Yeah. Well, like the situation there, I think, is played for the laugh.
Yes.
Because I think what it is the seriousness and the solemnity of that soliloquy is playing against the sort of ramshackle nature of where he is and the people around him. It's the contrast. But I think the speech itself is still played seriously, and he gives it seriously.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
wants
yeah.
to play it.
Yes. I mean, kind of the wonderful thing about Lubitsch is, that he's very wise and accepting of people's failures, right? So Joseph Tura is an egomaniac, whatever, right? The wife may or may not be cheating on him, but she's lovely and kind, and she loves him, and she wants what's good for him, and she's always reassuring him,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So you always kind of get like, this combination of elements, right? All played either for laughs or for pleasure or delight, kind of the costumes, the decor, the food that's spoken of. It's always a source of like pleasure, yeah, of something
Yeah.
kind of lovely.
The one character who you might say, the one character who it would be most possible to have hate for, although I still don't think it is really, would be Seletsky. Because I think he's the only
Yes.
character who's played totally seriously. And he is just a sort of spy Gestapo officer who's going to give all these names to the Germans and have them all rounded up and shot. And there's not a moment in his character that's played for a laugh, I think.
Well, no, I don't agree. I mean, the whole seduction scene in the hotel, with the food, and then, where she says, "Oh, let me read you, your name," right? Which is a ploy to get him to sign the letter, and she goes, "Ooh, I hope you live up to that Y,"
Yeah.
right? Yeah, kind of, all of that is played to make him seem charming and respectful, and a sophisticated man. Yeah, like, you know.
Yeah, I just didn't feel he was played for a laugh, though. So in that scene, it's absurd that she is seducing him with this handwriting stuff, and she's being so verbally suggestive, and that sort of thing. But if he were being played for laughs, he would be a buffoon about it. He would be falling over, that sort of thing. He's not, right? Like
No.
it plays as serious. It plays as a drama. Those moments with him, I think they play as drama. They play as this guy has the potential to cause real damage to the sort of resistance and to kill a lot of innocent people.
Well, I think the thing about all of the Nazis in the film is that they're buffoonish, they're ridiculous, they're endearing, but also they're dangerous. I mean, you do get a sense of tension every time each one of them comes in the hotel. I mean, there is a real sense of danger. So I think, the way that Lubitsch manages the tone of all of it is, again, I think it's miraculous, really. I mean, I think I love Lubitsch more than almost any director, really. And I think this is one of his great works.
Yeah, I think its handling of tone is really incredible, and I think one of the reasons that it is because I think it switches deftly between the buffoonish and absurd and comic and farcical and the more dramatic. And I do think that it doesn't play absolutely everything for a laugh, and it doesn't mean to. And so when it needs to build drama or build in stakes or emphasize the kind of seriousness of the potential of someone's behavior and that sort of thing, it's very good at that as well, and it doesn't undercut those moments as it could with laughter. It could seek to undercut absolutely everything. And I think what's really good about it is it doesn't then do so with, it doesn't have kind of mawkish sentimentality or anything like that. If you can imagine like something like Jojo Rabbit, I think probably had that a bit.
Yes.
Like when it got serious, it tried to get emotional about it. And again, that's not what happens here. It's much more skillfully handled, the kind of the drama.
I think it's incomparable. I mean, I think this is a film in which absolutely everything works. I mean, from the very beginning, the setup at the beginning is fantastic, right? The theme about, plays and appearances and essence, and acting and reality and the way that acting becomes reality. Yeah, I mean, it's all kind of worked through with like an incredible precision, really. And then all of the lines and the way that the laughs are set up, that an artist like you should be so inartistic. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, or kind of, oh, I wouldn't sneeze at a laugh. Kind of, may I make a suggestion? No. Well, can I make an observation? I forget what the exact line of dialogue. It's absolutely brilliant, right? And again, it all kind of relates to the overall, kind of theme, really. And I very much like all of the major relationships. I actually also very much like, the relationship between the Turas, right? Yeah, kind of. You get the sense of like really deep affection and understanding and acceptance of each other's foibles, and yeah, and yet the irritations that are real. Yeah, like kind of, if I die, I want you to know I forgive you. But if I don't die,
Exactly.
I mean,
But that's such a Jack Benny line as well. That's such a Jack Benny thing to say. I read that the role was written for him, and you can tell. That's a line he would have written himself had he had the chance. For sure. And the way he delivers it. But if I don't die, it's unfinished business or whatever it is. I think he's wonderful. I really think he's absolutely fantastic in this. I think he nails the tone. I think he has. Because no one's putting on an accent or anything. They're just playing their own accents, which I think is an intelligent move. And so he just plays as himself. And it's perfect for this guy who is like I say, he's constantly looking for praise. And it's funny every time because you know that every time he's in disguise and he's trying to get information out of someone or do something, he's going to screw it up by saying, oh, by the way, isn't this actor the greatest? He's really good.
I think this is such a, just a great film because everyone's great, right? And actually, it has one of those supporting casts that is made up of people that everyone in the time would have recognized. That actually, people like us who are not of the period, but who nonetheless see a lot of classic films, I recognize almost all of the supporting casts. Right, they all get their brilliant little moments, right? The guy who plays Hitler, the director of the show who then kind of reappears, the guy who is the ham. Lionel Atwill is the actor, who keeps hitting his head in the lamp, right? And again, you can see how sometimes hitting your head on the lamp is funny the first time, and afterwards what's funny is the way in which it is repeated, the repetition in a different context. It's just so funny, right? Or the way that he's always asked to damp down what he says, right? It's like behind the Nazi's back, down. I mean,
and then they have that argument after they've been trying to fool some Nazi, and he says, it all went well until he started trying to act.
Yes.
And you ruin the whole thing. That's one of the things that I really like. I mean, the kind of central conceit of this group of actors using their acting abilities and makeup and so on to act as spies is a clever idea, and it's a funny idea.
To be resistance, actually, it's fantastic.
Yeah, but the specific thing of we're actors, so we can do this, and then it becomes like playing a scene. So when they get the Seletsky in at the start, and Jack Benny's constantly leaving the room, he's going, "I'm running out of dialogue," like it's a scene. I think that's a really beautiful little idea.
Yes, well, I'm so glad you liked it because I kind of. I think we began seeing it one time, but it was clearly just in the wrong mood or something.
It might have been.
So, I'm very glad you've seen it. I really do love Lubitsch, almost above any director, because, he's one who, on one level, seems very superficial. Yeah, he doesn't, he charms everything. Actually, this is kind of unusual in that he doesn't normally rock the boat, right? Like, he had this thing about, you know, the world being such an unsteady and unstable place that the most you could hope for is to like skate elegantly on the surface of things, right? You know, and in a way, that's what all his films do. But actually, the paradox is that they do so with great depth. You know, like if you've seen Inochka, it's still this great critique of communism. You know, if you see this film, it's really like this great critique of Nazism. But it's all done through first surfaces and lightness and yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
I think it's very beautiful.
I think the strength of the critique of Nazism in it, which is it's a good thing to pick up on, is I think it's not in the ridicule of its ideology, because I don't think there really is one in this, but it's in the personalisation of how the people in it behave, how Nazis behave and how they think and how they're made to, you know, you've got the one Nazi, I think it's the guy constantly saying Schultz, who says, you know, oh, please don't give me up to Hitler, please don't let him know. You know, and it's like saying something against him and then immediately forget. And the thing at the start, actually, to be fair, it's in the play within a play at the start where they're all saying Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler. And it's absurd. Actually, there's a moment like that in Jojo Rabbit, which it's probably you know, inspired by that, where they just say Heil Hitler 500 times because everyone has to say it to everyone, and you can't not say it because you know that would be betrayal and against Nazism and so on. That is where the strength of the satire of Nazism is. You know, it doesn't.
Yeah, though it goes. I think it goes a little bit behind that because you know one of the very last things in the film, when they get on the airplane and they say, "Oh, Hitler wants to talk to you," and they go in the back and Hitler says, "Jump!" and they jump out of the plane. I mean,
yeah, well, I think that goes with what I'm saying. I think that's the same sort of thing. It's about the behaviours inside, okay. As opposed to saying, you know, it's not about saying this is what Nazis wanted, so on and so forth. It's about actually within this kind of regime, the psychology of how you're made to behave and how you're made to think. That is what the satire is, because that's very easy to look at and go, God, that's so absurd, which it is, you know, because it's absurd as going, if I tell you to jump out of a plane, you'll jump. Yeah, without a parachute.
Though the film also underlines the fear that people lived with, right? So the Heil Hitler is always like a nervous, you know, kind of when they make the joke about him being a cheese, it was like, Heil Hitler!
Yeah.
It's like, you know, so the sense of always living in fear is very present. So the servility, you know, the blindly following orders, the buffoonishness, you know, kind of all of that is very much highlighted in the film. And actually, you know, I don't want to leave the podcast without just kind of talking about the beauty of the comedy. You know, the way that things get repeated. Like, you know, the Heil Hitler joke is like repeated endless times, again, in different contexts, you know, with a slightly different punchline from How myself, right? Like, you know, yeah. And actually, the comedy often comes out of the rhythm of the repetitions, right, or the alteration of those rhythms, right. It actually is really quite brilliant. It really is all about the timing, you know. So yeah, kind of, it's a great film.
And also in the people, it shares out the attention it gives to its characters quite a lot, I think. So you know, at the end, when they talk about Hitler's going to be at this opera house, and Carole Lombard says, "Oh, I can get us in there because every Gestapo officer I've spoken to has turned to jelly." You think, "Oh yeah," and then they go, "No, we can't use you. They don't allow women in there," and the plan becomes something else, and someone else gets the attention. In fact, it ends up on Greenberg who gets the attention. You know,
yes,
which I think is interesting. I think it's a smart. You know, she's had enough attention by this point. The film gives it to someone else.
Yes, it spreads that out. It's got a generosity of spirit, this film, that extends to everyone, including all of the bit players who get their moment. You know.
Although I wish it had been a bit clearer at that point about, because I thought they were going to kill Hitler, and the reason I thought that was because when I think it's the director who says Hitler's going to be at its opera house, and he says, "Do you remember when we did Murder at the Opera?" And someone says it was a flop. He says, "Well, it might be again." And I thought, "Oh, does that mean murder? Right? Does that mean they're going to kill?" And then so when they distract all the Gestapo officers with Greenberg and they get him away, because you've seen Hitler enter the theatre. So you think, oh right, so they've got a chance to kill him. That's what I thought was going to happen. And so when they were just leaving, I thought, and it was only when they got on the plane I realised, oh, that's Hitler's plane, right? That makes sense. But I wish it had been a bit clearer about that before then. I think that was a reasonable mistake for me to have made.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you see it now again, you'll find it perfectly clear.
I did go back and have a look. I thought, because there is talk about the plane beforehand, but it's not addressed as Hitler's plane beforehand. They just say, we've got a plane going to Switzerland on Thursday, here's 2 tickets. I think it could have been a bit clearer, but it's a niggle.
I didn't have any problem with that. Anyway, I'm very glad you saw it.
Yes, so am I.
So any last words on it?
I rather liked it, Good movie.
I mean, you rather like it's one of the great masterpieces of the cinema. You rather
everything in
it.
moderation, José. It's very, very good, and it's one can only imagine how it would have been received at the time. Really, like even if there are similar things now, I can't think of an example offhand, but there must be examples more recently of people doing something great and it being taken as too soon or in bad taste and so on and so forth. But one can only sort of imagine how it would have been received at the time. And clearly it's a bold and brave film to have made at the time,
Very much so. And also it's supremely elegant and sophisticated.
Yeah.
It's played very high, kind of. It's played at a level of incredible sophistication where, there's a whole thing, that's so unrealistic. And actually this film has nothing to do in a way with realism in the sense that, it's all about fakery, right? But actually about fakery that reveals truths, when played very high, very polished, very sophisticated, which I think is what this film also is.
And I think to compare it once more to Mel Brooks, I think that is actually the central difference. And I think you pick up on something really apt, really, really appropriate when you talk about Lubitsch being German and Mel Brooks being American. Because I think that, in some way, that really actually centrally speaks to the difference in sensibilities. Because this is someone who lived in this, and although, as you say, he didn't escape it himself, having left Germany long before this, he will have had family, they will have known people there, it will have been closer to his heart because it's his country. America...
A lot of his family was killed.
The American sensibility is different, it's more aggressive. And it also it makes me think of Sid Caesar as well. The Sid Caesar, the Nazi character he used to do, who again was buffoonish and loud and brash and stuff. And it's like that is much more in the Mel Brooks mode of being very over the top and in broad strokes and stereotypical and that sort of thing. And there's a place for that, but actually the subtlety and the sensitivity and the complexity with which the characters are handled here is very sophisticated, as you say. I think that's the right word for it. And it plays very well.
It's also wiser and kinder. Yeah. Because Lubitsch was intimately familiar with the actions of the Nazis. In fact, I think he returned to Germany in 1933 to publicize the film. He had a big press conference at the Hotel Adlon, and this happened just at the time when the Nazis kind of took over, right? And because he'd been one of the great figures of Weimar Germany. He directed some of the most popular films of the era. Yeah, he was a national figure in Germany, Lubitsch, right? But of course he was Jewish. So, kind of when the Nazis came in and then all the Kristallnacht stuff, and, he would have known. And in fact, he supported a lot of people getting out of Germany. He supported them in America. He was actually intimately familiar with all that the Germans were doing, right? So it's this thing of, it's your homeland, it's your language, it's your culture. And on the other hand, there's all this hatred directed at people like you. He was familiar with all of that in a way, that Mel Brooks just was not. Mm-hmm. But he had a wiser, more understanding idea of what it is to be human, I think, than Mel Brooks does.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. But the producers is still really good. Well, the first one is. The remake was crap.
I hope people discover Lubitsch, because really he's an endless source of delights. I mean, I've seen this film, I don't know now, about 20 times, and it just gets better each time, and you notice more things, and kind of you admire the mechanics and the structure, and and the actors and the line readings. It's on almost every level. It gets greater and greater and greater. So do see it if you get a chance.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good film.
Thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening.
Bye bye.